Rachel's piece is completely different in a way, but it's also a great piece of sculptural artwork, I would say. Is it?
Sure.
Okay. But it's also a piece of painting, but the connection to Julianne is that it's a piece in space, actually. But this piece is reverse of yours because it's filled and you cannot enter it, and you are not allowed to open it. You're just allowed to approach it from outside and to look at it from outside, and then it becomes a painting, I would say, and very intriguing and very touching painting. But this sculptural painting, or a painterly sculpture, has a very important story behind it, and you have to tell us that story.
I have to tell a story. I was thinking, you know, when I knew this panel was here and the proximity of the show was not only like in time right here, but also physically, I wouldn't have to tell a story, but I'm happy to tell it. The whole piece is based on a story about Alexander von Humboldt, who was a naturalist from the late 1700s and early 1800s, who I have been interested in for a long time. And I was researching him, and I came across this story that was written about him, that when he was traveling to what we know of now as Venezuela, he was following the Orinoco River to its source. And while he was doing this, he did what all naturalists do. He was collecting all the flora and fauna he could. He was not a linguist, but he was recording the languages of the indigenous tribes that he encountered, mostly phonetically, because a lot of those languages are not written, just spoken. He was staying with a Carib tribe, and they had some parrots. He realized that parrots were speaking a human language, but not the language of the tribe that he was with, because he had a really good ear. And he asked about this and found out that these parrots had belonged to a tribe called the Maipore. The Caribs had warred with Maipore a few weeks before, wiped them out completely, taken the parrots as spoils of war, and therefore these parrots were the last remaining speakers of this language, and also then the last trace of these people. So as the story goes, he acquired the parrots, brought them back to Europe, and told this tale of extinction and recovery. My work is all about loss and our desire to recover that which is lost. So when I came across this story, I knew I had to do something with it, and so that's where this piece began. I got two parrots, and I trained. Should I keep going with that?
Sure.
Trained them to speak Maipore. And what I did was I found von Humboldt's writings, because he published writings on his travels that were very famous in the 1800s, and I did find where he did document the Maipore language phonetically. So I took these words to a linguist. I had to go through many linguists before I found somebody that would tolerate me, but I got a lot of like, why don't you teach them Spanish? People will understand that. I said, no, this isn't the point. So I finally found somebody that would help me, and what he did was to take those words and that had been recorded, and then help me put together phrases I could teach my parrots to speak. And I also found somebody who knew something about parrots, and she helped me train these two parrots that I got to speak the Maipore language. And it took me about a year. And while I was training the birds to speak the language, I also built this aviary it's really a sculpture. I would never even pretend to be a painter, but the word painting comes up because when I was working with the shadows in the piece yesterday and Thomas walked by, I said, it's a lot like painting, which makes me very uncomfortable because I'm really a 3D person through and through. But it was fun. Anyway, so there is a painterly process, but it is a sculptural installation that is an aviary that the birds live inside of. And you only see them in shadow. And that's, I guess, the void part of it. For me, conceptually, on every level, it's very important that you only see the birds in shadow. And shadow is something that resonates in a lot of pieces that I do, because shadow is something I was feeling akin to some things you were talking about in terms of the absence and the presence, because shadow is something which, you know, if you have light, you have to have a presence in order to create a shadow. And so a shadow is really a confirmation of both an absence and a presence simultaneously. And I just love that kind of tension that exists with the absence and presence simultaneously being confirmed. So that's a little of it. There's more, but I'll stop.
David, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think the idea of absence and presence is exactly what happens in ventriloquism, you know, where the ventriloquist faces him or herself while speaking. And so you have this notion of ecstasis, which is the Greek notion for being beside oneself, you know, as beside oneself in anger. So the ventriloquist dummy is literally a kind of being beside oneself. And so it's almost as if this language was being carried by these birds. You know, it's almost as if, let's say, voice, words, language was carried by the dummy. You know, in some sense in ventriloquism, it's a complete separation. And hence, there's almost a loss of character on the part of Edgar Bergen, for example, who was very demure, many of you might remember this, as Charlie McCarthy, who was exactly the opposite, being very rude and you know, upfront about things. And so art is often the license to be able to say things that we couldn't say otherwise. And that's exactly, I think, what this is about, this notion of, this general notion of absence or loss or void, as Thomas would put it.
I would say that in general every image is presence of absence and in reverse. Because if you have a painting like of an apple, then you see an apple and you see something in this painting like an apple, but it refers to an apple. This apple that it refers to is absent. So you have it here as present and also absent at the same time. It's not just true for shadows, I would say. It's true for any imagery. But the question is it true for the voice too? Is the voice being separated the same way as an image is? When you are talking, when we are singing, when we are expressing our voice, when we use our vocal cords, is there a difference like being absent and present too? Or are we a pure individual, not being separated, not being divided?